Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dr. Rebecca Heiss. I'll tell you about Rebecca in just a minute. Those of you who have watched the show know that LinkedIn Live focuses on, we pose questions to thought leaders and doers like Rebecca, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a better understanding of ourselves. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, the commitment we feel toward one another. Grace for me is the generosity we show, respect we give, compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader, especially now in challenging times, it requires leaders to stand up and bring people together. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. It's an honor to have you.
Oh, thanks. It's an honor to be here, John. I appreciate it.
Great. I want to tell everybody about you. And I love the first line of your bio. It says, Rebecca Heiss knows fear. We'll explore that and find out exactly where. Well, it is Dr. Rebecca because she has a Ph.D. in evolutionary biology. And she also knows about stress. She's dedicated us to helping us become more self-aware and overcome our limitations, some of the unconscious stuff that drives us back. Her research has been designated transformative by the National Science Foundation. And folks, that ain't easy. The National Science Foundation doesn't put up with lightweights. Anyway, she's a recognized author. Her new book comes out in April. So we're first up to talk about it. She is also the CEO of her own company, a 360 review mobile application called Acuity, which we'll talk about. Rebecca has found her calling in helping others recognize their potential. Your earlier career was as a teacher at both high school and college, and you're a founding member of a charter school. You speak all over, including multiple TED Talks, and you have a dog at home named Guinness. I know all about Guinness, not about your dog. So anyway, welcome, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that generous introduction. I appreciate it.
Great. People are under a lot of pressure these days. So you are an evolutionary biologist. So what's happening to us physically when we feel this stress?
Boy, yeah. I mean, we are absolutely in overdrive. I mean, I think of the analogy of a parked car with the accelerator floored, right? Our baseline levels of stress are so much higher. You know, if you think about ancestral times, they had like one thing to conquer every day: survive, right? We've got a list of to-dos that is never ending. And what happens is that we start off with these higher levels of baseline stress and they spike and never come back down because we're constantly in this state of threat. You know, there's horns honking, there's people that don't look like me that I have to interact with. There's so many things that our brains aren't built for. And what that does is it weakens our immune systems. We have cognitive decision-making that worsens under stress. And, if you think about the way our brains are designed, our bodies are literally breaking down under the stress that we're putting them under. So not great.
Okay, so with that warm note, so what do we do about it, Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, great question. What do we do about stress? I think the first thing to recognize is that stress isn't something that we need to overcome. Right? We have to start to work with our stress. We are always going to have stress. If it's not this pandemic, it'll be the next thing. We think that we will get over the hump and then, right? That's the lovely thing about humans. We're always this optimist. But there's always going to be another stressor on the horizons. So I think we have to start by recognizing not everything is life-threatening, right? We have to put some separation in our brains between this fear, this stress, and it being an absolute shortcut to death, because that's what our brains are used to, right? Ancestrally, you weren't a little bit cold or a little bit hungry, you might actually freeze or starve to death. So that shortcut between discomfort or a little bit of stress and death was important. Today, you turn up the thermostat, right? Or you open the refrigerator. Right. So many of the stressors that we have to separate out and say, oh, that's not a tiger, right? That's not a life-threatening situation. Okay. So just beginning to sort our fears.
Now, all stress is not bad, is it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. In fact, it's stress that literally gets us out of bed in the morning. If we had zero stress in our lives, zero cortisol, we wouldn't do anything. We'd melt away because we wouldn't have hunger. We wouldn't have anything. So stress is kind of, if you think of it as like an inverse U curve, if you have zero stress, you also have zero performance, right? Like, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to get you out of bed for. Think if you're a trust fund baby and life is just perfect and there's zero stressors, there's nothing to perform for. Your best performance happens here, where you actually do have some level of stress. The trick is not crossing the chasm, right? Not going over to the other side and having your performance decline when you get overwhelmed with stress.
Okay. So I think you said something about stress being an investment. Am I correct in that? And in other words, it's an awakening for us. So I misinterpreted that. So I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. It could.
Yeah,
yeah.
Now, the other side of stress, or intense stress, what it produces is fear. So what's going on with fear?
So physically, I mean, fear is really similar to stress. We're having the same responses. Our body responds to fear with a stress response, that classic fight, flight, freeze. Yeah. The emotional response is what separates things out, right? So emotionally, the way we respond to fear is really personalized, right? It's the exact same chemical reactions in our body. We're going to have this stress response, but we have an opportunity to interpret it, which is why some people really like scary movies, right? They go out and they seek that thrill because fear can be interpreted as excitement. Mm-hmm. And this is the coolest, most empowering thing, I think, for people to realize, is that when you're under this state of fear, you're in a fearful state, you have an opportunity to interpret this as either a stressor or something that you're excited about. And it's all between your ears, right? How do I want to interpret this?
That's interesting. We've had on this show a couple of experts in fear, in the sense of both special forces, one from the Navy SEAL, former, and another a Royal Marine. Oh, wow. So they talk about the management of fear. So what do you say about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And certainly those trained Navy SEALs, and they know you have to train in order to manage your fear. And the first part of that training is really about awareness. So starting with the fact that we're mostly in fear most of the time, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being called out as being an imposter, letting people knock us down, right? If we want to manage fear, we have to recognize it. So I personally cheat. I use alarm clocks. We happen to carry one around with us all day. So when you think about your alarm, the alarm that you might set in the morning, right, to wake up. Most of us, if they set an alarm at a regular time every single day, you start to wake up a few minutes before that alarm goes off because you've trained your brain to become conscious at that particular time. We can use that same strategy to train ourselves to become conscious while we're already awake. So it's kind of pulling ourselves out of this subconscious space where we might get locked into fear. So I use that alarm clock just sort of jolt me out into my awareness and say, what am I afraid of right now? And when I have that opportunity to think about it, to process it consciously and cognitively, I can decide one of two things. Either that's a real threat and I should be afraid of that tiger that's coming at me, or it's a threat, but what can I learn from it, right? If this fear is actually realized, this is a great opportunity for me to grow and to practice that growth. So
you said something interesting, and I'm glad you grouped fear into, because in my mindset, when I hear fear, I think of physical fear, the ancient proverbial tiger, or what our soldiers in combat go through. But you talked about it in a deeper emotional sense that I think we all feel, and that's, you said, fear of rejection. So what's going on there?
It's a deep-seated, powerful fear for many of us, for a reason, right? Rejection, getting kicked out of your tribe. Again, remembering that our brains aren't built for this world, they're built for our ancestral world. That's 150 people that you relied on. So if you're rejected by someone, it could spell death. Yeah. So we have to actually step back and not only be aware of our fears and, oh my gosh, I just got rejected, but actually train ourselves to overcome that fear, because while rejection to our ancestors meant death, today it means you get rejected. It's okay. You don't die. So I actually talk to people about doing fearless exercises. And what this involves is going out and trying to get rejected. So an easy place to start. Right?
I was pretty good at that many, many years before I was married. I was really good at it.
I'm telling you, it's great. But the more you practice, right, the more comfortable you get. So an easy place to start is, asking for a 10% discount on coffee. Right? You walk up, you order your cup of coffee, you say, hey, can I get a 10% discount? No other explanation, right? For most of us, I know for me, I have a massive stress response in that moment, right? I start to sweat, my mouth goes dry, my body gets flooded with cortisol and what? They say no. And then you pay your $10.99 or whatever you pay for coffee, walk out the door, nothing bad happens, right? Nothing bad happens. So now my brain records, oh, I had a stress response and I didn't die. The more we actively seek discomfort, the more we can say, oh, okay, didn't die, everything is fine. So that when discomfort finds us and we're not actively seeking it, we're prepared. We recognize, oh, I'm having a stress response. All those other times I've layered this down in my brain so that I know this isn't a life or death situation. I can take a deep breath and I can operate from that cognitive conscious space that I want to be in.
I like that. It's a kind of a practice thing. So, I haven't actually, well, I was going to say I hadn't bought coffee in a shop in a long time, but actually I have. So anyway.
Well, either that, you can do it for groceries. You can do it for everything, right?
So, and that's part of something called the training that you do, which is, I love this term, seeking discomfort.
Yeah.
We do that. Actually, it's something that I talk about when in executive coaching on my colleagues. Part of there won't be any growth unless there's a degree of discomfort. And so that's part of that. So any more thought on the training that you want to explore?
Yeah, it's exactly like any kind of physical training, right? You're training your brain the same way you train a muscle. And for any of us that do any kind of physical activity, like if you're doing bicep curls, it's not comfortable. If it's comfortable, then you're not growing your muscle. It has to physically rip. Your muscle has to tear in order to grow. It's painful. It's a difficult process. But if we can hold that in our heads and say, okay, this is difficult for a reason, it means I have an opportunity to grow now. It helps us get through some of that pain.
I think that's great. And that's the recognition of what fear can do for us rather than what fear does to us. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's what fear can do for us rather than what it does to us. That's a great way to put it.
Well, good. But the challenge, though, is that when we're fearful and we might, we doubt ourselves. So what do you tell people when they're in that state?
Yeah. So, the brain believes the story you tell it, right? Whatever you're telling your brain is going to adapt. So if those negative self-talk stories are all about, I'm a failure, I'm a loser, I'm going to break down, I'm an imposter, your brain believes that and it's going to act accordingly. So these are often referred to as ants, automatic negative thoughts. And we all have them, right? They're there for a reason. If we didn't think that wrestling behind us might be a tiger, we didn't live, right? That we became tiger lunch. So those automatic negative thoughts are there for a reason to keep us alive. But today, again, a lot of those automatic negative thoughts need to be smushed. So I tell people to start thinking about those ants, those automatic negative thoughts, and seeing if you can replace them with what I would refer to as a PET, a practiced enlightened thought. We know from the power of habit, right? We can't just squish something. We have to replace it with something. So if I'm taking out the belief that I'm a failure, what do I replace it with? I'm not ready yet. That's easy, right? It's not that I'm a failure. It's that I'm not ready yet. So what am I going to do so that I can achieve what it is I want to achieve? What training do I need? How can I grow? It's a process that opens your mind to the possibility rather than keeping you fixed into a set pattern.
No, that's great. And I like the way you're providing kind of a roadmap and to get out of it, because I'm somebody that believes in roadmaps, even though my wife says I never ask for directions. But it's good to know, especially when we're in times of crisis or moment, that we can survive this. And I think your work in fear is enlightening us that, it's fear. We have to make it, own it, if you will. And make it work for us. So you have a concept called superheroes. What do you mean by that? And what is it? How is this relevant to what we're talking about now?
Yeah, sure. So I like superheroes. I always have. And one of the defining characteristics of a superhero, right, is that you have to have a superpower. So what I challenge everybody with is the fact that we all actually have that superhuman power. It's called self-awareness. It's just that most people don't enact it, right? Only 95% of people believe that they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% actually are. And so we all have the potential to capture our fears, have them work for us rather than against us. But it requires this superhero effort of becoming self-aware.
That's, self-awareness is so essential. One of earlier guests last year was Tasha Eurich.
She's great.
Her book Insights focuses on self-awareness. So, and the thing is that we all think that, so many of us think that we're self-aware, when actually, as you said, and Tasha shows, we're not. So
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah.
So
the thing is too, like I give this idea, this superhuman thing of being self-aware, but even superheroes, I'll push back just even a little bit further and saying even superheroes have a vulnerability. They don't like to be
Superman was kryptonite.
Right. Bingo, right? And Superman spent his whole life trying to avoid kryptonite. Mm-hmm. So my challenge is to all of your listeners, like, what would you do if you, instead of running from kryptonite, took the kryptonite, held it, and said, hey, everybody, this is my kryptonite? Well, what you've done is you've empowered everybody around you. You've empowered your team to say, oh, he's flaunting his kryptonite. I can solve that kryptonite. When we're self-aware, we're able to say, this is a weakness of mine. Here you go. Can you handle that? And Wonder Woman would come in with her little lasso and she said, oh, kryptonite doesn't bother me. I got you covered. But so many of us stop with the self-awareness. We're like, I'm aware that I'm terrible at X, Y, and Z. Those are my weaknesses. I will hide them forever, right? Instead of embracing them and saying, hey guys, here's where I need some help. This is where I have some growth. And that's when the combination, the confluence of self-awareness and the overcoming or working with our fears comes together.
There's a great story about that, and I like that. Doug Conant, who was the former CEO of Campbell Soup, took over when the company was in pretty dire straits. Now, Doug, by his own definition, is an extreme introvert. But he realized that coming new to a firm where no one knew him, he would have to deal with other people. So what he did was he did what you had survived. He raised the issue and he told people, he said, if you see me standing in the corner, please come over and talk to me. I'm not being standoffish. I simply don't know how to introduce myself. So by acknowledging that, he gave other people permission to approach him and be accessible, but it also lightened the burden. So I like what you're talking about. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I hadn't heard that before.
Doug's remarkable. He runs a firm now called Conant Leadership, and he's written extensively about leadership, and he's a great leader himself. So I like it. Anyway, but moving forward, but this idea of inviting other people in to help you, I like that concept. So.
Yeah, I mean, really, when I talk about fear, I tell this story about my dad. He was a minister, and he talked about, he took a water bottle once in front of his congregation, started shaking it, and water's going everywhere. And he asked the congregation, what spills out? Or why is the water, oh geez, I just ruined it. Sorry. He's like, why does the water spill out? And the answer is that the water spills out because it's water that's inside. What's inside of you? And the answer, I think, to most people is fear. Fear spills out. So the question is, how do you want your fear to spill out? Is it spilling out in this chaotic fashion where it's just covering everybody and drenching everyone? Or can you shake with that fear and in doing so still fill somebody else's cup, right? Empower them with your own recognition of your fear.
That's it. That's a great story. And it gets to the idea of vulnerability. And one of the assets for leaders is vulnerability. The flip side, or inclusion in that, is humility. So embracing that. And that's basically what you're doing, is giving us permission to do that and bring others together with us. So
there's great science behind that too, actually. There's something called the Pratt effect, which I call it the Jennifer Lawrence effect. If you're familiar with Jennifer Lawrence, a celebrity, she's known for her amazing acting skills, but also for her gaffes, right? She's the one who says things and is like, shouldn't have said that, or like falls at the red carpet event. And the reason that we love her so much is because she's herself, right? She's not trying to pretend to be anything else. She's falling and she's owning it. And that humility, it's called the Pratt effect, because we value people more who embrace that humanity in them. We trust them more, and we see them as having better leadership skills. So, yeah.
No, it's good, and especially in times now. Is there a connection? I'm just going to throw this at you, between vulnerability and empathy. So, is there a connection?
Gosh, I'm sure there is. I'm thinking about that right now. I think absolutely. I think if you are not vulnerable, if you're not willing to express and feel the feelings that you're having, then it's impossible to connect with somebody else and recognize that they may share those same vulnerabilities with you. So if you're not willing to be the vulnerable one first, you can't develop empathy for the other who might be holding on to the same insecurities.
Great answer. Thank you. Now, so flipping back to stress, how can we do? What are some practical ways we can alleviate stress?
I mean, I won't tell you anything that you haven't heard before. Exercise, right? Exercise is huge. This is the one thing that I think people overlook, because they're like, hey, I exercise. No, what you're doing is you're actually signaling to your body that you've escaped the predator, right? So you think about this. You're having a stress response all day long. If you go for a run or for a cycle, or you do some kind of aerobic activity, what that does is you literally outrunning this predator that's been chasing you. And it kicks in your parasympathetic nervous system, which says, oh, we're okay. We can relax. We can begin to restore. We can start again and build, instead of staying in that state of stress the whole time. So I think people overlook exercise. And then breathing. Breathing is something we all do, which is good. But it's also, I think, really undervalued because of its simplicity. Yeah. But when you slow your breath, it is the one thing that you can control in this automatic nervous system, right? You can control your breath. So one long, slow breath starts to slow the heart rate. When you start to slow the heart rate, you start to slow the release and the circulation of the hormones. When you start to slow their circulation, you're again signaling, we're not in stress. Everything is okay. So if you can control that breath, if you can do just 1 or 2 breaths, you're actually putting yourself out of that cycle of stress.
That's great. Now, you said something very novel that I had not heard before. I always know exercise is good for stress, but you made a link to the physiological. Is it? We're actually feeling that we are free of the predator. What was that connection?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You've outrun. There's some stressor, and in ancestral times, right? The stressor might be more than likely a predator. Yeah. And so when you actually physically work your body, because when you're under stress, you release a ton of glucose to your muscles, right? To run, to get out of there, to get out of dodge, right? It's the flight part of this fight, flight, freeze action. And it enables your body to move. If you don't move, what you're doing is you're building up glucose, which leads to diabetes and hypertension and all of that. So when you actually exercise after having a stressful day, you're signaling to your body, we did it. We survived, right? We outran that predator. We're safe now. And it allows your body to say, whew, safe.
Well, that's a great idea. Now, you have something very special, and it's an app called Acuity. Tell us about it.
Yeah.
I'll put the link to it in the notes. So
awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Acuity is kind of like a Yelp for you. We rate everything from our Uber drivers to our meals, but we rarely get that kind of feedback unless you're doing 360 reviews, which I love a 360 review, but they're done once a year, typically, maybe for one person. And often when you get that feedback, it's a little too late to go back and do things differently. So Acuity takes on a 360 review that's continuous. What you do is you select traits that you're interested in knowing more about. And you rate yourself on those traits. So things like leadership skills or listening skills or empathy. I think I'm, a 7 out of 10 on that. Then you send this out to your friends, family, colleagues, coworkers. And they rate you on those same traits anonymously over the course of a week. You never know when they're going to get pinged for that survey. They rate you, and at the end of the week, you can start to see where your gaps are. So the funny story that I tell is when I was beta testing this, I think I'm pretty funny. Right? Like I'm like a 8. I'm a 9. I'm a 9 out of 10 on humor. Like, I'm funny. And I sent it to my family, and I got back 2s, John. 2s. And I did the classic thing that leaders do, right? I'm like, they got it wrong. They don't know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
So I took a breath. This was a moment where it's like, okay, I'm feeling stressed. Why am I feeling this stress? Because, turns out I have a gap. And it's really important to recognize that these gaps don't mean that we're bad people or that we don't have skills. It means it's an opportunity for me to grow here. And I'm funny outside of my family, but in my family, turns out what they valued most was not something that I thought I had. My hidden strength that I discovered was empathy. And I'd rated myself much lower. So when I'm showing up with my family, instead of trying to joke my way out of a difficult situation, what I need to do is deliver my actual strength, which is empathy. So Acuity allows you to actually work from your real strengths, not what you think your strengths are.
It's a wonderful thing, and we in coaching use 360s regularly. But I like your the app process of it. It's quite novel, so it's exciting. And I will put the note in there. So
it's also terrifying, right? Like it's really scary to get that feedback.
That's great. We're coming near to the end of our show, and I always ask every guest if they have a story of grace. So, is there something you'd like to share, Rebecca?
Oh my gosh, there's so many stories of grace, but I pulled this one out actually. So I want you to imagine, right, that you have this opportunity to interview with a master corporate executive coach, author of 14 books, a 2020 global guru, top 30, and this person emails you the day before your interview requesting really very reasonable information from you, but you are in fact busy doing other things. This actually happened for your viewers. John is laughing because that was him asking a very reasonable request from me the day before this interview, and I missed it. Now, it would have been very simple for John to have said, taken offense, shown anger, frustration, stress about the fact that the person that he was interviewing that he never really talked that much to before had not gotten back to him. But instead, I am so, so grateful to you for your grace, because what John did was he offered kind advice and reassurance as I scrambled to deliver all the things that I promised him that I would deliver and hadn't. So I so appreciate that note of grace that you gave me just yesterday. And I love this concept of grace because it is simple. When we're caring and compassionate with people, you don't have to have your name on a building to deliver wonderful leadership through grace. So thank you for your kindness there.
Well, I did not know this, but you're a PK, right?
I am.
So you grew up in a constant state of not being in grace, I would have guessed.
I was definitely, preacher's kids, the old joke is we go one way or another. So you can probably guess that.
Oh, I think you're on the right path, Rebecca. No, God, you are way too kind to me, and it's a good story because I can be pretty self-righteous and pretty full of myself. So thank you for that. I didn't come across as a monster. So, but and again, it's and I'm glad you mentioned that, because really what that moment of grace is, it's a transitory thing, and all of us have that capacity to be kind in a moment. And sometimes we miss it, but when we miss it, hey, let's make it up the next time or something like that. So it's a good story. So Rebecca, you have so much to share with us, and you have a new book coming out in April. Did you want to show it to us?
So John, this is also funny because this was part of his very reasonable request, was to show the book. Well, I don't have the book. This is a totally different book with my cover on it because the book isn't coming out till April, but that's what it looks like when it comes out.
Instinct. It is available pre-order on Amazon, is it not?
It absolutely is.
Great. Well, we can find that. And how can people find you, Rebecca?
Yeah, probably the easiest place to get in touch with me is on my website, which is just Rebecca Heiss. That's HEISS.com. And you can find me on all the socials at Dr. Rebecca Heiss, DrRebeccaHeiss on Twitter and Insta and anywhere else. So.
Right. Well, Rebecca, you are very kind to share your expertise with us. You have much to offer. And in our challenging times, there are more and more and greater need for people of your expertise and your fantastic ability to communicate it in ways that are simple and tangible and accessible. And I thank you.
Thank you. Very kind. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, John.